That's really interesting, right? You have to be faithful in the management of this vulnerable person's property, as in you can't move their boundary stone.
Yeah.
Right. Even more careful than you would be with your own. You have to think of them as your own children, right? Like God says there, if you disregard, widows and orphans, then I'm going to make your family widows and orphans. Because I'll come after you. And although Plato's a little bit different because he seems to think that the ghost of the departed parents is going to haunt you.
Yeah. And surely we can figure out a way to make a living without doing it on the backs of widows and orphans.
Yeah, I think it's really something we should think about today. You know, I mentioned how foundational these ideas are to our whole society, our whole civilization.
Yeah.
But you look at everybody's got an iPhone that was probably built with slave child labor, at least in part.
Welcome to Biblocus, where the Bible intersects with your life. I'm Timothy.
And I'm Caleb.
And you're listening to Bible Discussions, the forum where we explore biblical topics that are relevant to your life. Today we're continuing our series on the 30 sayings of the wise from the book of Proverbs. And in this episode, we're going to cover saying number 10. So we're a third of the way.
Yeah.
If my math's any good. And this one is kind of interesting because it talks about not moving a boundary stone. Again.
So if you haven't been doing that since the second saying, then good job.
Maybe this is for the people that moved a boundary stone and they wanted to move it back. And they were like, no, you can't even move it back. So anyway, I don't know. So we're talking about not moving a boundary stone, but there's a little bit of a wrinkle over the last one. So let's go ahead and read that in Proverbs 23, verses 10 and 11.
Do not move an ancient boundary stone or encroach on the fields of the fatherless. For their defender is strong, he will take up their case against you.
So, like I said, it's really similar to saying number 4. So we won't repeat a lot of what we said that time. We're not going to talk about Chesterton's fence again. We're not going to talk about the respecting your parents aspect, your forefathers aspect that we talked about last time. But you can go back and listen to the saying number 4 to get some of that if that sounds interesting to you. But we're going to try to focus on the new additions that were made here about not encroaching on the fields of the fatherless, and God taking up their case against you if you do. So That sounds like a bad idea.
It is interesting that in the sayings of the wise, moving the boundary stone would come up more than once, right?
Yeah.
It's like something we probably don't think about too much today. Mm-hmm. Even like moving property lines, that could come up, but it was so important to them, the allotment of the land, because it was the land of the inheritance.
Yes, and we didn't really talk about that last time, so that's why we're leading off with what Caleb just said there. Why not move a boundary stone? Well, Joshua made a big deal of coming into the promised land and fighting for all the different land and dividing the land up amongst the tribes, and God had them take a census of the people back in the book of Numbers. One of the most exciting parts of the Bible that I'm sure none of you forget is Numbers 26 with the second census.
Yeah.
Because the first census was pretty good, but then when it got to the second census, everybody was like, oh.
That's when I started paying attention.
Yeah, I mean, like, this is going to be even better than the first
It's like the second giving of the law.
Yeah. And among all the people who were interested in that census were the daughters of Zelophehad, okay, because there's a special circumstance we learn about in the census there that's interesting. So this is a census made by clan and by tribe. And so we're going to just read, we'll ask for your forgiveness first and ask you to stick around for the rest of the podcast. So we're going to read a little section of the census just on the tribe of Manasseh. So in Numbers 26, verses 28 through 34, it says, the descendants of Joseph by their clans through Manasseh and Ephraim were the descendants of Manasseh through Machir, the Machirite clan. Machir was the father of Gilead. Through Gilead, the Gileadite clan. These were the descendants of Gilead. Through Ezer, the Ezerite clan. Through Helek, the Helekite clan. Through Azriel, the Azrielite clan. Through Shechem, the Shechemite clan. Through Shemida, the Shemidite clan. Through Hepher, the Hepherite clan. And then there's a little parenthetical statement here that says Zelophehad, son of Hepher, had no sons. He had only daughters, whose names were Mala, Noah, Hagla, Milcah, and Tirzah. These were the clans of Manasseh. Those numbered were 52,700. So that's a pretty good size chunk of people.
Yeah. And it's easy to get kind of lost in the monotony there, but it reminds me of like when we did the study on the God of creation, how there's a lot of repetition in the creative account, like things like according to it's kind. There were these phrases that kept coming up, or it is good. God saw that it was good. And then suddenly he says, it's not good that man should be alone. And that's part of that Hebrew poetry is developing a pattern just so you can break it, to call your attention to something. And you'll notice there that, so-and-so was his clan by his name. And then it gets to what was Zelophehad's father, Hepher?
Hepher.
Yeah. After Hepher, the Hepherite clan, there isn't a Zelophehadite clan because he had no sons. And so I think you're supposed to notice that. Oh, there's something different happening here. I guess he was the first person in their clan or on all of Israel maybe to the first man not to have a son to carry on the clan and to carry on the property rights in the inheritance that's given to them.
Yeah. I mean, it was sort of like a branch getting cut off of the tree, like, and all of a sudden, oh, wait, that's just going to die down that alleyway there. There's not going to be one. And so the daughters of Zelophehad, they went to Moses directly. And in Numbers 27, so we are going to read some more from Numbers, but it's going to be more narrative stuff. So it'd be easier to follow along than a list of people's names. But in Numbers 27, verses 1 through 11, his daughters talking to Moses, it said, the daughters of Zelophehad, son of Hepher, the son of Gilead, the son of Machir, the son of Manasseh, belonged to the clans of Manasseh, son of Joseph. The names of the daughters were Mala, Noah, Hagla, Milcah, and Tirzah. They came forward and stood before Moses, Eleazar the priest, the leaders, and the whole assembly at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and said, our father died in the wilderness. He was not among Korah's followers who banded together against the Lord, but he died for his own sin and left no sons. Why should our father's name disappear from his clan because he had no son? Give us property among our father's relatives. So Moses brought their case before the Lord, and the Lord said to him, what Zelophehad's daughters are saying is right. You must certainly give them property as an inheritance among their father's relatives and give their father's inheritance to them. Say to the Israelites, if a man dies and leaves no son, give his inheritance to his daughter. If he has no daughter, give his inheritance to his brothers. If he has no brothers, give his inheritance to his father's brothers. If his fathers had no brothers, give his inheritance to the nearest relative in his clan, that he may possess it. This is to have the force of law for the Israelites, as the Lord commanded Moses. So it was very important to God that these property rights be established and maintained. And even though this isn't talking about the boundaries of them, I mean, you can see where that would be just as important to God that somebody doesn't go move the stone between Ephraim and Manasseh or something along those lines.
Yeah. And this is also tied to the idea of kinsman redeemer that we've looked at before.
Yeah.
Like what Boaz does for Ruth and Naomi, where the closest relative or a close relative of the tribe marries the daughter to save the name and the property from dying out.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was pretty funny in that story because he goes to the guy and says, oh, you can get this property. And he's like, oh, yeah. And he goes, and a wife. And he's like, wait a second.
I wonder if it was a Moabite wife that made him balk. Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know either. But so you listen to this story and you might say, oh, okay, so that's cool. God's taking care of the property. But you say, well, what if one of those daughters, because once the daughter gets the land, what if she marries a man who's not from their tribe? What would happen to the land then? Well, God had that covered too, because later on in Numbers, last reading out of Numbers here, chapter 36, verses 5 through 9, it says,
then at the Lord's command, Moses gave this order to the Israelites. What the tribe of the descendants of Joseph is saying is right. This is what the Lord commands for Zelophehad's daughters. They may marry anyone they please as long as they marry within their father's tribal clan. No inheritance in Israel is to pass from one tribe to another, for every Israelite shall keep the tribal inheritance of their ancestors. Every daughter who inherits land in any Israelite tribe must marry someone in her father's tribal clan, so that every Israelite will possess the inheritance of their ancestors. No inheritance may pass from one tribe to another, for each Israelite tribe is to keep the land it inherits. So, in other words, you look at like the Habsburgs, right, marrying into like every royal family until they
Yeah.
rule most of Europe.
Yeah.
He was like, yeah, Reuben or whoever is not going to get to make all these arranged marriages and inherit everybody else's land until they have
Yeah.
half of the kingdom of Israel themselves.
Not that any of the sons of Jacob would ever be scheming like that.
Right? No, yeah, they didn't do that to each other while they were still alive, so their descendants shouldn't do that.
No, yeah, never. Yeah, and it's just, you see how important it is to God when he makes these decisions and through Moses conveys them to the people. It's just one more reason why moving a boundary stone is a really bad idea. Because see how zealous God is to bring, these things about. And he's the defender of boundaries, right? Too. So he's going to bring judgment on whoever's moving that stone.
Mm.
So yeah, don't. So these sayings of the wise, they were tied up in maybe some context that we don't have these days, but it helps you understand why it was one of the sayings of the wise.
Yeah, because you can take the same principles and take it from that culture and its institutions, and then think about how those principles would apply to us today in our setting.
Yeah, whatever our issues might be.
Yeah.
So that kind of leads us pretty well up to these two new concepts that show up in this saying of the wise, as opposed to the old one, which basically just said, "Don't move a boundary stone set up by your ancestors." The end.
Yeah.
This one gives a little more context in it, and part of it is this idea of encroaching on the fields of the fatherless, and on God taking up their case against you if you do that. So we saw in this case of Zelophehad's daughters that God was, jumping in to make decisions for this, right? That your forefathers and God have all made decisions about where the boundaries are supposed to be, who owns what lands, and all of that. And you don't turn those decisions over lightly, and you especially don't turn them over because of the misfortunes of somebody else.
Yeah.
This is very similar to saying number one.
Right.
Where it said, "Don't oppress a poor person just because they're poor." Right? Like, oh, look what I can do.
And we looked at how they do in fact have an advocate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Might be easy to look and think, well, there's no one left. They're all by themselves, so they're ripe for the picking.
Yeah, and like I said, the zeal we saw with which God defended Zelophehad's daughters, and now you think about him applying that same zeal toward taking up the case against you.
It's actually pretty comparable to Nathan's parable to David. If you think about it, the rich guy with like 1 million sheep, and he takes his neighbor's one lamb to feed his guest. And it's like, why would you do that? And David immediately recognizes, oh, you thought you'd get away with it because it's just some poor guy, but now the king's heard about it, and I'm coming for you. And then he finds out,
yes,
it
you're
was
right.
him.
Yeah, that's a good one.
But that's how. That's I think another example of it.
I think if you had asked them, oh, did you know there's a story in the Old Testament where these 3 daughters have no brother and their dad dies, and the people are trying to figure out what to do with the inheritance, and so God just makes a decision about it? They would be like, oh, well, if the Old Testament God made a decision about that, it would be this, patriarchal thing where they lose everything just because, it's too bad for you.
Yeah.
But see, that would be because you don't know anything about the Old Testament God. God wants justice for the unfortunate. He always has. I mean, like we just did this big study of the prophets and the minor prophets, especially, and just hearing how God wants justice for the downtrodden, and the unfortunate. So that would be a bad guess if you thought God wouldn't land on the side of the downtrodden people. And I mean, you think about like the Beatitudes. We've talked about the Beatitudes in a couple of our lessons, and it talks about, well, blessed are the people who mourn, because they're going to be comforted, and so on. The poor and everything else. So God is the defender, the champion of people who are or downtrodden. So if you knew that, and if that was your sense, then you would probably know some of these other passages, both Old Testament and New, that we're going to talk about, but mostly Old Testament, beginning with Psalm 68, verses 5 and 6, which say, "A father to the fatherless, a defender of widows is God in his holy dwelling. God sets the lonely in families. He leads out the prisoners with singing, but the rebellious live in a sun-scorched land." So that's a pretty cool passage.
Yeah.
I love that picture of God leading a parade, like singing the songs at the head of the parade, and behind him's a bunch of prisoners.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it makes you think of like the descent into hell, kind of, right?
How so?
Like Christ victorious over death.
Oh, yes.
Descends into hell. Yeah.
And then you're saying leading.
not because he's like damned, but, but because he's won. He can go rub it in, he gets to have a triumph, like the Roman triumph.
I see what you mean. Yeah.
Or marching through the Arch de Triomphe in Paris, which famously has been done by more invading armies than French armies. So that's kind of what's going on there. Yeah, it is pretty cool. An image there, God's at the head of the parade.
Yeah, it's really nice. And again, like if your thought was, well, the Old Testament God's this mean guy that beats everybody up all the time and kills people, and no, he actually is the defender of the downtrodden and the one leading them out.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so make sure you got your theology straight before you start thinking or saying things about God that aren't accurate.
Yeah, and another similar verse or passage, a pair of verses in Isaiah, says in Isaiah 1:16-17, "Wash and make yourselves clean. Take your evil deeds out of my sight. Stop doing wrong. Learn to do right. Seek justice. Defend the oppressed. Take up the cause of the fatherless. Plead the case of the widow."
Yeah, when we studied Isaiah, we had our if you go back and look through our Bible discussions episodes, you'll see one called cleansing. And that was where, we said the main theme of Isaiah, especially the early parts of Isaiah, is cleansing. There's so many images of cleansing. And here, the one I really like is like just one way to cleanse yourself: stop doing evil, start doing good things, start acting like God, right?
Yeah.
Because the things it describes there are the things that God is all about: seeking justice, defending the oppressed, taking up the cause of the fatherless. I mean, we've already seen all of those in the sayings of the wise.
Mm-hmm.
Very first one, in fact.
Yeah. Another thing you could do, you could add to that list, learn the sayings of the wise.
That's true. Yeah.
Or live out the sayings of the wise.
Yeah.
Even better.
Yeah. And so start pleading the case for the widow instead of saying, "Oh, can I have her land?" That's just crazy stuff. Crazy time. All right. A New Testament passage that we've read before, but is
pretty famous one.
Yeah, is right down the line on this one is James 1:27, which says, "Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress and keep oneself from being polluted by the world."
Think about like the early church, famously they would, a lot of Greco-Romans would leave undesired children out, abandon them to probably just be eaten by predators. And Christians started going around rescuing them and adopting them, which was so weird to the Greco-Roman mind. And then combine that with, eat my flesh and drink my blood, they're like, what is that? So you're stealing children, then you have some kind of cannibalistic ritual. They didn't understand what was going on there. But this was...
They were okay with wild beasts eating them.
Yeah, that's fine, I mean, that's something the church has always taken seriously, I think, in pretty much every era, whether it looks like that or pro-life movements today or founding orphanages. And, pretty much every church has at least a preschool in it, to help look after kids in some capacity.
Yeah. Well, I think the interesting thing about this is like, what is pure and faultless religion to God? And it's acting like God.
Mm-hmm.
So if you do know what God is like, if you made the right choice in our Old Testament quiz question there, and you thought, yeah, God would be all about protecting the fatherless, protecting the less fortunate, then that's what you should be about too.
Hmm.
If that's the signature of God, if that's the signature of Jesus Christ on what he would do, then we should be making that ours as well.
Yeah. I mean, you think about where it says, I think in Ephesians, right, that we're saved to do good works that He prepared in advance for us to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like in some ways, that's kind of the point. It's like why that's one of the end goals of the whole salvation thing.
Yeah.
Is that we can then do the good works that He would do.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect. So here's a more sobering passage, okay? Because maybe all you people that are scared of God thought he would make the bad choice. This would be more along your line of thinking, because it's like, oh, okay, this sounds terrifying. But for good reason, okay? So in Exodus 22, verses 22 through 24, it says,
"Do not take advantage of the widow or the fatherless. If you do and they cry out to me, I will certainly hear their cry. My anger will be aroused, and I will kill you with the sword. Your wives will become widows, and your children fatherless."
So yeah. Well, I mean, it's a very, very sobering thing to consider, but it's just the extreme of what we've been saying all along. Why would you want to stoke God's zeal against you, by doing these things? And he's saying, like, straight up, if you do stuff like that, and people cry out to me and say, this person, kicked me when I was down, like our Obadiah episode.
Yeah.
Then things don't turn out too well for you. Go check out the Obadiah episode. I think it's called "Judge Not" on the list of Bible discussions. When you arouse God's anger, that's not a smart idea.
Yeah.
So now, Caleb, you're the Biblocus historian, the official Biblocus historian.
I left my badge at home.
Yeah. Now you found something in Plato that was very similar to this in its thoughts. So you want to read that?
Yeah. "Orphans should be placed under the care of public guardians. Men should have a fear of the loneliness of orphans and of the souls of their departed parents. A man should love the unfortunate orphan of whom he is guardian as if he were his own child. He should be as careful and as diligent in the management of the orphan's property as of his own, or even more careful still." That's really interesting, right? You have to be faithful in the management of this vulnerable person's property, as in you can't move their boundary stone.
Yeah.
Right. Even more careful than you would be with your own. You have to think of them as your own children, right? Like God says there, if you disregard, widows and orphans, then I'm going to make your family widows and orphans.
Yeah.
I'll come after you. And although Plato's a little bit different, because he seems to think that the ghost of the departed parents is going to haunt you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's like, you sticking the shovel in the ground to dig up the boundary stone, and it's like, shoom, all these ghosts land on you.
Yeah.
So, but that's cool though. I'm glad you found that. That's a really neat passage. So,
but I mean, if both the Bible say it and Plato say it, that's
I don't know. I mean, I was hesitating, but now that I know Plato is on,
I'm just saying you couldn't pick two more foundational things.
That's true.
To our whole civilization.
This is a foundational thing of Western culture. Yeah. All right. So, speaking of the history of Western culture, now I thought it would be nice to wrap up with something else our Biblocus historian found, which was a letter from Saint Basil of Caesarea that he sent to Count Hiladius. So this is like a plea that he was making to another official. So since you found that, do you want to read that too?
Yeah, I'd kind of like to know, who translated this or when it was translated, because it reads to me, it sounds like reading like Jane Austen or Charles Dickens. There's like so much almost humorous, like passive aggressive language here.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if that's exactly the way it was written or not. So anyway, it's a little bit long, but it'll kind of give us the whole context, and you'll see he's making the same exact case here. So to the Count Hiladius, "I shrink from troubling your good nature on account of the greatness of your influence, for fear of seeming to make an unwarrantable use of your friendship. However, the necessity of the case prevents my holding my peace. Our sister, who is a relative of mine, and now in the sorrowful position of a widow, has to look after the affairs of her orphan boy. On seeing her above measure oppressed by intolerable responsibilities, I felt great compassion for her, and feeling deeply on the subject, I have hastened to invoke your aid, in order that you may, if possible, deign to support the messenger whom she has sent, to the end that when she has paid what she promised in person in my presence, she may be freed from any further pressure. She had agreed that she should be relieved from the interest on payment of the capital. Now, however, those who are looking after the affairs of her heirs are trying to exact the payment of the interest as well as that of the capital. The Lord, you know, makes the care of widows and orphans his own. And so do you strive to use your best endeavors in this matter, in the hope of the recompense which God himself will give you. I cannot help thinking that, when our admirable and kindly prefect has heard of the discharge of the capital, he will feel for this afflicted and unhappy house, now stricken to the knee, and no longer able to cope with the injuries inflicted upon it. Pardon, then, the necessity which compels me to intrude upon you, and give your help in this matter, in proportion to the power which Christ has given you, good and true man as you are, and using your talents for the best. So, you can kind of see why I'm curious about the exact wording there. Because there's a lot of tongue in cheek, it's like, I hate to bother you because I don't want you to think I'm trying to just, ask for favors because I got a influential acquaintance, but here's the situation. And if you didn't catch that, she had made a contract essentially to pay off the capital on a loan of money without paying the interest. And then once her husband died, the debtors are like, yeah, you're going to have to owe us the interest too.
There's so many sayings of the wise in play here. It's hard to count them all.
Yeah.
Because you've got a debt with interest, and you weren't supposed to be a debtor or, and lending out. So anyway, so you got that one going. Then at the end of it, he talks about using your talents for the best, where we talked about, talented people will serve before kings.
Mm-hmm. And
then you've got this whole one we're doing now with, the unfortunate, the widows and orphans and so on, being their agency is God. And he appeals to that in here and says, well, God looks after them. So you could take care of it, or you could let it fall back to God, and then we'll just see what his decisions are. That was,
yeah,
that was what we said in saying number 1, by the way, when we talked about the agency of the poor. The reason that the king had an interest in putting saying number 1 in his number 1 spot in the list of sayings of the wise is if everybody in his kingdom was taking advantage of poor people, then all the agency of the poor would fall back to him as the king.
Mm-hmm.
And he would have to go out and enact justice for all those people, or he could educate his citizenry to take care of the poor.
Yeah.
And then none of that agency falls back to him. And I think that's what God's plea to us through these sayings of the wise is, hey, if you guys would do your part in taking care of widows and orphans, then that would relieve me of their agency. And I really don't think you want to anger me about this, like the Exodus passage says, right?
Yeah. It's a good case study there, to see a specific example of the church imploring the secular powers, the state, to act rightly here. And then, he guilt trips him at the end. I know what a good and true man you are.
It gets back to the idea that there are some things that are more important than money, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which we've said in some of our other episodes, just like 2 episodes ago, with "Don't wear yourself out to get rich," and surely we can figure out a way to make a living without doing it on the backs of widows and orphans.
Yeah, I think it's really something we should think about today. I mentioned how foundational these ideas are to our whole society, our whole civilization.
Yeah.
But you look at everybody's got an iPhone that was probably built with slave child labor, at least in part. And, we've got all these problems surrounding broken families, abortion, IVF, a lot of neglect of just the basic family, and allowing it to break down, or even in some cases with some of those procedures, probably causing or encouraging the death of vulnerable children. So it's really something we should think about in how we build our lives and how we think about others and the things that are going on in the world around us.
Yeah, because there's always a boatload of misfortune in the world, and there always will be. And we can be a part of ministering into that, right? But to help take care of people when they're in those situations. And that's a laudable thing, as the James 1 passage said. That's like the heart of religion as far as God's concerned.
Mm-hmm.
But what this saying and some of the other ones have talked about is that's not an opportunity for you to seek gain out of the misfortune of other people.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, I didn't realize that everybody in that family had died. How can I get their land?
Yeah.
It's like, what?
Nobody's got, so there's this old woman with no relatives. Maybe if I get friendly with her, nobody else is gonna inherit the property.
Well, I didn't think about it. You mentioned Dickens, and he has an amazing.
Oh yeah, I mean Dickens is like, this is basically what he writes about.
Yeah, well, he has an amazing book called Little Dorrit, which is about the Dorrit family, and he goes and visits them in debtor's prison and takes some things, and he's real kind to them. Because he's of good, healthy means, and so he befriends the daughter especially, and she falls in love with him, But so he takes their case upon him because he's like, what happened to this family? He can't figure it out, So he goes and he tries to figure it all out, and he eventually does, and they have this huge estate due them in the courts, and it's just sitting in a file somewhere, and he digs it all out and finds it, and then they become incredibly wealthy. And then Mr. Dorrit writes the guy off like, oh, he's just somebody who wants to get more of my wealth. He's acting like he helped us when we were down,
Mm-hmm.
And he totally knocks the guy out of their life. And the daughter's beside herself, Little Dorrit, which the book's named after. And so anyway, it's kind of a tale of this where a guy stands up for the people who are downtrodden, and then everything turns around for them. And so on. I won't ruin the book for everybody that wants to go read it, but there's more to it than that. But it's a similar story. But yeah, Dickens, like you said, he was the champion of this kind of thing.
Yeah. All right. So don't seek your own gain from the misfortunes of others.
Yeah, that would be a good idea. And then because like Plato said, their ghosts make them. Oh no, wait, no.
And that's also Dickens. It's like the dude in the Christmas
Jacob
Carol.
Marley. Yeah.
What happens to? Well, it's not. It's like a whole Scrooge opens the window and sees these ghosts everywhere. All these greedy, selfish people who then they're doomed for the rest of the eternity to float around watching everyone suffering and not being able to help them.
Yeah. So read some Dickens if you're down. You want to be lifted up. But yeah, don't seek your own gain from the misfortune of others. And so that kind of leads us into our wise words takeaway, which is
help the unfortunate. That is what God would do.
Yeah. So that's kind of the whole idea of James was saying, like you want to practice true religion, do it the way God does. And so many of our other passages and this particular saying of the wise is like, be like God and keep that boundary stone where he wants it. So, if you don't know, if you're surprised by any of the things that we talked about, the compassion and the interest God has in the unfortunate and the depth of mercy and grace and love he has for all people, downtrodden or not, you can learn more about God. What's the best way to do that, Caleb?
Well, you can read the Bible, listen to Biblocus, and join a community of people pursuing God's truth and wisdom.
Yeah, we always want to encourage you to join a body of believers because they're the people who are trying to be like God, right?
Yeah. Go to church.
Yeah, there's plenty of stories out there, plenty of news stories, plenty of other things of Christians who have failed at those things. But by and large, we're trying to do the right thing. We're trying to be like God. And so, you could join that body and help us too.
Yeah, we always end that way. Every now and then we should probably point out the importance of being in physical communion with a church body.
Mm-hmm.
It's great to listen to theology on the internet. We certainly hope you listen to ours. but I think today it's really easy to get comfortable doing that and not have to go build any relationships.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's why I meet with Caleb every week so I can help the less fortunate. It's something I believe in. Sorry.
Hopefully the next one's about holding your tongue or something.
We can cut that part out. All right.
No, that's fine.
All right, so he's Caleb and I'm Timothy, and thank you for listening to Bible Discussions on Biblocus, where the Bible intersects with your life. Please consider subscribing to this channel and helping support our efforts. All scripture quotations, unless otherwise indicated, are taken from the Holy Bible, New International Version, NIV, copyright by Biblica Inc., used by permission of Zondervan, all rights reserved. This program is copyright 2025 by Timothy Klingerman. God bless all of you.